All right, hello. My name is Michael Chin. I'm the author of the new novel, My Grandfather's an Immigrant and So Is Yours, coming this September from Cowboy Jamboree Press. I'm recording this a little bit in advance, so by the time you're all hearing this, the book might be out or the pre-sale might be going on. Who knows? But just pay attention to social media and whatever I post on my blog, and I'm sure that will be more accurate than what I'm saying now. But I'm calling this interview series So Is Yours. And I'm really pleased today to have Shawn Berman here with me, virtually with me, I should say. I think we're on opposite sides of the country, but nonetheless, to be able to come together via the magic of Zoom here. So I have a bio for Shawn here that I've adapted from his website. I welcome him to correct me if any of this is, if I've misinterpreted or misreading it or whatnot. But Shawn Berman is a writer, cinephile, and beer nerd. He runs the Daily Drunk, an online journal. His writing tends to focus on pop culture, movies, and comedy. Some of his writing can be found on Hobart, Little Old Lady Comedy, and Maudlin House. And he's the author of the books Mr. Funnyman and At the Movies from Alien Buddha Press. You can follow him on Twitter at SBB_writer. So with all that, Shawn, the way that we met was actually through those online journals that I referenced in reading your bio. So you were kind enough to take a few of my pieces. You ran Dream Journal, which took a few of my kind of movie-inspired flash fiction pieces, and then more recently in the Daily Drunk. So I really admire those projects. I was so happy to be a part of it, but just sort of the way that they sort of lack pretension and sort of, really kind of, if anything, kind of steep in kind of the pop culture or kind of, letting our hair down with things that you wouldn't necessarily see in a more traditional literary magazine setting. But so before I blather on any longer, let me turn it over to you and just sort of, I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of specifically starting just with the online journal projects and kind of, what motivated them, what your process has been, kind of your vision for those projects.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's really great talking with you today. Yeah, these both of those journals, especially the Daily Drunk, those started from a lockdown journal sort of thing. I was laid off from work. I needed something to keep my time busy and occupied, and I don't know. I always had an inclination to kind of start one, and I thought, well, there's no really any journals out there that are kind of fun and lax where you can let your literary hair down for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. I want to read about Adam Sandler and Jim Carrey and Guy Fieri. And there's nowhere else where people can seem to go to read and write about that stuff. So I said, what the hell? Why not?
Yeah.
So I started that, and I really had no expectations for it. I've never done any literary journal stuff before. And a year plus later, we're still kicking. I still have the drive to do it, and it's been a lot of fun. We're growing. We're doing print anthologies now. We're releasing print stuff. We're in bookstores. We're gonna have live events. So it's just crazy to think about. It's just something I started on a whim.
Yeah. No, I mean, and sometimes I think that's the way it goes, right? Is that it's when you don't kind of overthink a project and kind of analyze the market super carefully. It's just sort of pursuing something that you're interested in and that there seems to be a niche for, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. That's like, this seems cool. Let's try this. I no expectations whatsoever. So this is
Yeah.
this is all extra. This is great.
No, awesome. And well, and I expect, based on my own limited following of people who tend to listen to me and read my stuff, some of the people who are interested in listening to this, interview might be especially interested in, I want to submit to the Daily Drunk. I want to, join this community. I want to see my work out there. And I'm curious, what you would tell those folks, because I think part of what I admire about the project is its accessibility. That doesn't feel as though there's a lot of secrecy. There's not long wait periods. I think both times I submitted to you, I heard back from you within a week's time, which is really unusual in kind of literary circles and whatnot. But I'm curious
Yeah.
what you might say to people who are kind of interested in becoming a part of it.
Yeah, I really pride the journal and how it's accessible. Like you were saying, it's you have established writers. You have writers who will send you something. Hey, I wrote this on the toilet. I don't know what this is. And I've never submitted before, but what about this? And it's just my only advice is don't take yourself seriously when you're sending stuff. Just try to have fun. This is a fun space. There's other more serious avenues you can go about, but I just want to share work, connect with people, other writers. I'm a writer at the end of the day as well,
Yeah.
and I view myself as that first. I'm just trying to make connections with other writers.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's great. And you've led me to the next thing I want to ask you about, which is Mr. Funnyman, which the folks who are listening can't see me holding up the book. I'm holding it up to Shawn to prove that I have the copy. And I won a drawing that he offered, so I shouldn't be too proud of winning a free copy. But nonetheless, I did read it though, and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, and I think part of what was really fun about this collection to me is, again, similar to the vision that you were talking about for the Daily Drunk. There's a lot of pop culture. There's a lot of kind of humor in there. And I'm curious, especially about the pop culture piece of it, because so many of the pieces in here reference, movies, television shows, all sorts of media. A lot of Adam Sandler packed in there. And I'm curious about kind of, how, why, what's your process? What moves you to write about these things, and how you go about that.
It's so interesting. It's just I'll have a day where I'm watching a bunch of Adam Sandler movies, and I'm like, I kind of want to write about that. I don't know. It seems interesting. There could be an interesting angle about him winning the golf tournament, and or him being a Scuba Steve. There's something there, and whether it's an Adam Sandler movie or a Scorsese flick, everybody can connect to pop culture and movies and film and video games. Everybody has something that they're passionate about, like, with those things. And I think with pop culture and movies and video games and TV shows, there's something there. Everybody can recall a favorite. Everybody can recall a time and place that they were connecting and they were having a fun time with the people that they were around. But I just hope those pieces in large can evoke those kind of emotions, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yeah, and I think, as you said, when we think back to kind of nostalgia for our youth, not to say we don't have nostalgia for for books. I mean, because I think you up readers as well. But yeah, I mean, I think the first place I tend to go to are the movies I grew up on,
Yeah.
TV series, and and I shouldn't give short shrift to professional wrestling, because
Oh yeah, come on now.
that's a space where I've actually written quite a bit. I'm an unabashed, lifelong fan of the form. And so when I see someone who has poems about Stone Cold Steve Austin, I can't help but ask about that. So yeah, and this may be, I don't know if you consider yourself, a hardcore fan, or just kind of a passing interest, or where on that spectrum you might fall, but I can't not ask about, your kind of your
Right.
manhood in that.
Oh, I'm sure, like most boys growing up, I was just so into wrestling. It was Stone Cold. This guy's telling people to go screw themselves, flipping people off with the bird.
Yeah.
How awesome is that? I mean, I went to kindergarten. I saw Stone Cold flipping people off, and I did that too. I said, I want to do that. Stone Cold's doing that. But wrestling is so much fun. There's so much theatrics, and there's so much personality. There's just so much to write about. Uh, what's not to love about Stone Cold? I remember taking the day off of school, and this is when he was driving the big beer truck into the
Right.
Times Union Center at Albany. I was like 10 years old, or however old I was, and that was just so great. You're gonna remember that. He's just spraying the whole McMahon family with beer. That memory's there forever.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and I'm a little bit older than you. I think I'm not going to date myself very specifically here, but I'll say I was in high school for kind of the height of Stone Cold and The Rock, and Triple H and all of them, and I always thought that was sort of the perfect time to be a wrestling fan, was like I am at this stage where I want the most crass possible humor and kind of
Yes.
violence and all that, and that's sort of what the style was in that day. But I can imagine you, even as a younger person, that still that kind of resonates. There's something that sort of transcends generations, I think, almost about specifically kind of those Stone Cold theatrics. But yeah, but no, that's cool to hear. That was really just literally a part of your childhood, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good to meet other writers like yourself who just like, hell yeah, wrestling was a huge part of my childhood growing up, and then let's write about it. Why not?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, something else that's cool from your collection, and beyond your collection, because I've seen your other pieces, online as well, that aren't necessarily in the book, but your titles, they tend to be, long, they tend to be humorous. They often feel like poems themselves. And I'm just curious to hear a little bit about sort of your approach to that. Sort of how intentional you are about that. Do the titles come first, then the poem, or vice versa? In general, kind of, how that comes about.
Yeah, the titles definitely come first. The titles sort of give way for for the rest of the piece to form. I guess it's sort of like a prompt in a way for myself. It's once I have the title, once I know what I want the piece to be about, You get that out of the way first, and I think it's easier for me for the rest of the piece to flow. I very rarely will I write a piece without having the title established, as weird as that is.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And I know different writers work different ways. I would say I'm like a 75% of the time I have to write before I know the title, but the other 25%, it's like, yeah, the title, I know exactly what this is.
Oh yeah.
Ironically enough, whereas this is the only book this has been the case for, but this novel I have coming out, the title totally came first.
That's awesome.
An Immigrant, so is yours. I actually envisioned it as an essay after I thought of the title. This was in the height of people kind of talking about Trump's immigration policy and the fact that his grandfather himself was an immigrant, and then other kind of conservative pundits kind of coming out and people tracking their lineage and all that. And I was sort of constructing all these things. And my grandfather was an immigrant, so it's literally true of myself. But then I started thinking more, reflecting more, and realizing what I had to say in the essay space versus the novel space, and the project transformed from there. But anyway, that's sort of a tangent. But yeah, I think it is sort of interesting that interplay we can get between what a title sort of gives us in terms of a prompt, like you said.
Yeah, it that's good to hear that the title came first, though. It's a lot of people, they do struggle with the titles, and yeah.
And well, and so with all that, and speaking of sort of titles and riffing off of that, your other book at the movies. So I mentioned at the top of the podcast I'm recording in advance, so it's towards the end of July right now. The book has actually just come out as we're speaking, so
Yes.
I'm excited to get a look at it. So again, congratulations on that book getting out into the world. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that project. So I know it's at least framed as essays as opposed to poetry, which Mr. Funnyman is.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear kind of what inspired this project, what it consists of. The title suggests again we're looking at pop culture. The movies are going to play a part here. But yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective, kind of what this thing is.
Yeah, funny enough, I never intended to write an essay collection or to have a collection of movie inspired essays. I don't know, one day you start writing an essay and it's about movies, and then another day you have another essay about movies, and then I don't know, a few months down the road you go, hey, I got something here. I have a bunch of similar pieces framed around movies, and they all have a similar tone. Maybe start thinking about compiling them into a manuscript. And it sort of came together last year, kind of quickly, actually, within a six month time frame, I'd say. I mentioned I was laid off during the pandemic, so I'm just banging away at my keyboard, trying to take my mind off everything that's happening. And it was kind of really amazing to put something like that together. I've never really considered myself an essayist or a poet or any of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to give us a peek into this collection, because I know at least a couple of the pieces from this book are online, so people can find them. I'll try to link to some of them in the show notes. But what movies are we talking about? And kind of, I guess I'm curious about your perspective on that. I have some hints based on what I've read of your poetry, based on some conversation we've had. But I'd love to hear just a little bit more about kind of what this book actually consists of.
Yeah, we got Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, my favorite movie of all time. I think that's one of those movies that hit you in your very pretentious teenage years, and it just sticks with you for some reason. No matter how hard you try to shake it, it just sticks with you.
So, it was my pretentious 20s, but yeah, I hear you on that.
Very similar, yeah. But it's just one of those that really stuck with me, and it's still sticking with me today. That one's about the whole beach scene, and just what that means, and dreams in general, and just it's interesting how that movie is just still sticking with me today. So I have that one. I have essays where what could my overweight 16-pound cat, what would he be a good role for? I don't see him being in Lion King or anything that requires him to be the star of the show, but we have that one. There's an essay in there about how I joined the Quidditch club in Brooklyn, and that went terrible. I got absolutely destroyed by some guy named Mikey T. He was huge. He had arms the size of water coolers, and he just mowed me down. And that was the day my dream of being a Quidditch star died.
Okay.
Yeah, just a bunch of random movies in there.
Yeah, no, it's just an interesting thing, right? Because I know that I feel as though there was
Oh yeah,
a transformation from, J.K. Rowling invents it, and we won't get into the J.K. Rowling baggage here.
no,
There is baggage, but we'll put that aside and put that in a box for the moment. But it's sort of a fictional game, and then I feel like there are these pockets of people trying to figure out how they could play this in the real world and kind of developing rules, all the way to it becoming an actual thing, right? That there are actual
yeah.
leagues, there's a more formalized, sport now.
There are entire YouTube compilation clips
Yeah.
of like Quidditch World Tournaments. I'm like, oh man, and I just joined this to meet people when I first moved down to the city. I didn't know anybody. It was like I
Yeah.
got to make friends somehow. So this seemed like a low pressure, low commitment sort of thing, but I was wrong. It was too much pressure. Yeah, total opposite.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, no, I'm really excited to check out that book as well. And yeah, and you're a busy guy, right? So I mean, in addition to all of this, with the Daily Drunk, I know that there's the Awesome Awful podcast, right?
Yes.
Or I believe it's one of your colleagues who hosts it, but I know you've been on it multiple times
Yep.
at this point. And so I'll be transparent here. I've only listened to little bits and pieces. I've got it on my phone, so I'm going to listen to some more of it, soon after. But
Oh yeah.
I love the concept of it too, because it overlaps with everything we've been talking about in terms of sort of
Yeah.
destigmatizing the guilty pleasure, kind of enjoying kind of what's fun, whether it's sort of high art or not. And so, but what I want to lead to here, though, so we mentioned it a couple times already. Adam Sandler. There are poems about him. One of the first episodes is about Click of that podcast. So I know you're a real aficionado. It seems like of the Sandler. You're wearing an Adam Sandler t-shirt. So the folks at home listening can't see. Maybe I'll try to grab a screen grab of that. But that's great. So with that, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. And if it's too hard, we can expand the list. I'm going to say top 3 favorite Adam Sandler movies and why.
Oh wow. Billy Madison.
Hmm.
There's just a timeless feel to that. I remember my dad showing me that growing up. Well, he showed me all of them growing up.
Mhm.
This will give way to family for sure. But that one, there's just a charm to it. It's just so many classic bits. He's getting chased around drunkenly by the penguin. He's putting on his boots, going back to school. Sloppy Joe's, uh, Happy Gilmore. I mean, how can you go wrong with that?
Yeah.
Love a good golf movie. Um, Maybe Big Daddy. That one is so timeless. That could be one for me actually. That's just such a feel good one. It just even whenever it's on TV, even though I have it on DVD and all that, you can't help but watch it.
Yeah.
It's very charming. He's at his best when he's just so charming.
No, I think that's right, and it's funny because that might actually be my top 3 as well. So I think I'm on this. There's sort of, and correct me if you feel differently about it. You've studied his catalog a little more, and I'll be transparent. I've missed large chunks. I sort of saw a lot of the relatively early Sandler catalog from the '90s. I was a lapsed fan. I've seen some of the more recent stuff like Hubie Halloween and Uncut,
Right.
which I want to talk about in a moment here, but Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore, I feel like are sort of the definitive like statements of I'm here, like that this is what.
Definitely 1-2 punch. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always sort of feel as though they're 1A and 1B, like it's hard to parse which one is better or different than the other. But Madison being sort of the more random, sort of we're going to jump around. There's going to be sort of just sort of nonstop jokage here, right? Whereas Happy Gilmore, I think, has a little bit more of a plot, or arguably a little bit more of a heart, but not quite as funny in some ways to me. So I feel like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
care about story more or the laughs more. I could see going either way on that particular question.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, I think it definitely comes down to do you prefer the slapstick or do you want a little narrative in it? And I sometimes lean more towards the slapstick. I want to
yeah.
unwatch. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think and obviously we're parsing something very silly here, saying what's more or less slapstick in the Adam Sandler universe.
Right. Right.
I do sort of feel as though
We're
there was
splitting
a
hairs
period
here.
there, yeah, where he skews more towards actual narrative after that, right? With like Big Daddy or The Wedding Singer, or go to 51st Dates, movies like that. They have more of a there is a plot. There's often the romantic narrative that's kind of driving the thing behind it. So. But yeah, I think it's a cool space to kind of navigate, and deceptively deep. I think that there's really a lot going on there. But I'm curious. Uncut Gems. I assume you've probably seen it as someone who's such a big fan, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. So I have my own reactions to that film, but it's very different, right? That was sort of my return to the Adam Sandler universe after, I'm sure I'd rewatched Billy Madison at some point in between, but a decade or so away from really paying much attention to what he was doing in terms of new movies, at least. I'm curious, as someone who enjoys his catalog so much, what are your reactions to a movie like that?
Yeah, I obviously I enjoyed it. It's Adam Sandler like we've never seen him before.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah.
most anxiety-inducing film I've ever seen, and,
Yeah.
and it's great. He's balls to the wall for an hour and a half, and there's no escaping it. You're just praying that he doesn't mess up so much that he ends up in a bad situation. But it's a weird film for me. It's like I enjoy it, but it's not something I would ever place over his comedies.
Yeah.
It's not something I want to rewatch too many times. As much as I
Yeah.
enjoy his performance.
No,
Yeah,
I think that's really right. Because yeah, it's one of those things where, I could put on, Happy Gilmore virtually anytime, just in the background
yeah,
even. And it's not a hard thing to watch, right?
yeah, yeah.
Maybe a handful of jokes haven't aged so well, but 90% of it is very easy to, reconsume. But yeah, Uncut Gems, I don't think I would just, sit down with the popcorn or sit down while I'm doing
No.
the background. Just not that kind of movie. But yeah, I was talking with a friend about it, and we sort of arrived at the point of sort of thinking that maybe this is what an Adam Sandler movie is in 2020, or I think I forget, it may come out in 2019 or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Now with kind of everything kind of skewing to that more sort of dark space and sort of and exploring gray areas. Maybe this is sort of he's still an eccentric character. He's
Oh
still
yeah,
kind of in over his head in every imaginable way, except now it's serious.
right.
Now he's actually crying as opposed to doing kind of the kind of
Well,
sound.
what is it? He's 50 now. He can.
That
Maybe that's it.
might be it. You're right. No, great. But okay, well, so for the last stage of the interview here, as a tie-in to my new book, again, it's called My Grandfather's an Immigrant and So Is Yours. There's a lot about it that I've tapped into my own autobiography and kind of cherry-picked pieces of it, and a lot of it's fictionalized as well. But it got me thinking a lot about my own family, and as I'm talking to other writers, it occurs to me that's not always something that comes up when in interviews or social media as kind of what your family background sort of looks like. And sometimes for good reasons, because I know it could be a sensitive area. And so I never want to push people to,
Mhm.
ask the impolite question of like, oh, so what's your relationship with your father like? Um, so I do feel like it can be kind of an interesting space to explore in thinking about, us as creatives, thinking about identity in general, all of that. So, I want to include grandparents in this just as kind of a tie into the book, but I'm happy to not limit us to that conversation. I'm curious about kind of, your family kind of background and maybe how they've kind of shaped you, who kind of was most influential to you, how that's affected your identity as, a creative person, but also just as a human being as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't know my grandparents growing up. They both passed before I was born. But definitely my father, my mom, they had huge influences on me. My dad's also a little bit of a writer too, so I have a lot of vivid memories of us just writing these really crappy stories on loose leaf papers. We had one about a carrot who became or a boy who turned into a carrot, and that was like one of the first stories we wrote together. So I have a lot of memories of just writing random stuff with my dad, and we text every day about pieces that we're working on, and well, where can we go with this, or I'll FaceTime him and say I'm stuck with the plot in my book. What do you think? And we help each other out still, and that's been pretty great. And my dad is a pretty big comedy fan, so
Hmm.
I would say that has definitely shaped my writing and my interest. Growing up, he was like, "I'm tired of buying you all these crappy toys that just break after like a week." So we would go to Walmart and we'd pick out one of the other crappy movies out of the $5 bin,
Mhm.
and we'd take those home instead of a toy. And then we'd just sit around every Friday night. We'd grab a pizza and we'd watch these handful of movies that we'd grab, and that stayed with me a lot. It definitely has formed my viewing and my interests. Definitely formative.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And do you feel as though the work that you guys do, you mentioned that he's a writer as well. Do you
Yeah.
feel that there's real overlap and similarities in terms of the kinds of things you're doing or your motivations, or do you find that it's really separate and it's kind of evolved away from each other? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, he's a little bit of a satire writer too. He likes to write wacky pieces, but he doesn't really dive into pop culture per se as much as I do. But his stuff is also not as serious, I would say, and it helps. I'll say like, oh, I have an idea about a talking object, and I'll say, oh, I've done a couple pieces about that, and it's just nice to riff with one another.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is just curious, and you don't have to go into this if you don't have either you don't have an answer or if not an answer that you really want to talk about. But I'm curious about other families. Sounds like your father's been a big influence and someone who's sort of a creative partner with you in some ways, and and also just kind of influence your humor. I'm curious, are there other family members who you feel had an influence for the better or worse, or or an interesting, unexpected, maybe is a better way of asking it.
I'd say my younger brother definitely he dabbles in the writing, but he also whole like he's definitely into the movies like I am. He's definitely into TV shows, and he's always forwarding me like new shows or movies that are coming up. And he goes, "This could be interesting to talk about," and it's really good to connect with somebody like that who's also into that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I feel as though siblings are sort of this unique space,
Yeah,
someone who you sort of innately understand the aesthetic of more than
yeah.
I think most people in our life. Like at this point, I think I could say that my spouse, I sort of understand what she is or isn't going to like. There was like a good like 4 or 5 year
Oh yeah,
out period of like, okay, so this is where the line is. If this is too scary as like a horror movie, or this is too raunchy as a comedy, versus what you're actually going to enjoy.
yeah.
Whereas my sister, we grew up on the same movies. I
Oh yeah, yeah.
sister. She was very influential in kind of referring me to everything from movies to music to everything down the line. But I can sort of instinctively watch something and say, oh, I bet she'd like this, right? And
Yeah.
I suggest that to her. And there is a real divide, right? Like we both
Oh
watched
yeah.
wrestling up until the point that she was like 6 years old, I think, and then probably a little older, but probably like 7 or 8. But regardless, then she completely lost interest in the form, and I obviously went on from there. But there's a lot of other strongholds that we've
Mhm.
shared. So
No,
yeah,
yeah, that's funny. I've been with my spouse for 7 years now,
yeah.
and she just recently broke the news to me that she doesn't like Adam Sandler at
Oh
all,
no,
and she doesn't like comedy movies actually
does that
either.
count as irreconcilable differences? If you
I think so. I think I have a case. It broke my heart. I go, who the hell are you? I don't know you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
keeping that
Well,
secret locked up.
yeah. No, and just because you made mention for your spouse, I'm just curious, of any sort of role they play in sort of your creative life, or or is that, or yeah, is that something you keep separate, or is that a different part of your life?
Yeah, no, she definitely enjoys watching movies too, and she for a very long time she was always the first set of eyes on a piece that I wrote.
Mm.
If it could get past her, it was good enough to send out.
Yeah.
And so, but it's gotten to the point where she's just so tired of reading stuff.
Great.
She doesn't want to look at it anymore. But
Yeah.
she's so supportive. She was a big factor in starting the Daily Drunk.
Okay.
She bought the domain for it. She goes, "You've always wanted to
Okay.
do it. Here you go. Just hammer away." So
That's great.
definitely supportive, and I couldn't do it without her.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. Yeah, and it's sort of I like what you mentioned there, because I think that there's sort of this idealized vision that some folks have of if they're a writer and they're with their
Yeah.
partners reading everything that they do, and it's this whole intertwined life that they have. My partner's not a writer, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
like she's a creative person, but that's not really her world. And so she certainly read a lot of my stuff, but there's been periods where I've just got a lot of stuff coming out, and she doesn't keep up with it, and that's
Yeah,
fine, right? And it's
yeah, it's
sort of something
fine.
that you sort of separate the ego thing, but she is the one who bought me a plane ticket the time I went to AWP, and she's kind of the primary cheerleader in anything that
Mhm.
I kind of decide to
Oh
pursue
yeah.
creatively.
Yeah.
So no, that's interesting to hear of situations like that.
I think that's common too.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. I think you're exactly right. But yeah, well, so as we wrap up here, and Chris, is there anything else that you would like to plug or talk about? I mean, again, you're a pretty prolific person in terms of putting work out in the world and having different projects. I tried to do my homework. I tried to hit on the big spot, but is there anything else that you could refer readers to, or other even if there's specific pieces you have out in the world that are out online that people could check out to get a better sense of you if they haven't read much of your work yet, anything like that? I'd love to hear.
I appreciate that a lot, Mike. Yeah, just Mr. Funnyman's available on Amazon. Hell of a price, $3.99. I think that's going to be the forever price for it. I just want people to pick it up and read it. I don't want to make any money. I just want people to read my stuff. So that's out. At the Movies is out, my humorous collection of cinema-inspired essays. And I just want to go ahead and plug the Daily Drunk. I think a lot of the people over there are doing some awesome, awesome, awesome things. Awesome, awful podcasts. We have a lot of cool writers coming up. I hope people check that out. We're on Apple, Spotify, wherever podcasts are. And we got a lot of cool anthologies coming out. We got the Mallrats one that we're doing. We got a Lord of the Rings one. And at the time of this when this drops, we'll probably have a Halloween themed one coming out.
Oh, great. Okay.
So, a lot of cool stuff. And I'm really happy with where this is heading.
Now that's awesome. Well, keep doing what you're doing in the world. The reason I reached out is because I just admire the body of stuff you're putting together, and I think you're an interesting person to talk to for sure. So, thanks so much for making the time to do this. Yeah, hopefully we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Take care.
All right, thank you.